And welcome back, everybody, to the 2023 Liverpool Pokemon Video Game Regional Championships. I, as always, am Costa Didymos, and joined by the ever so lovely Mr. Ben Kiriakou once again, and we are here for Round 7.
Yeah, this tournament is absolutely in full swing. We're reaching the business end of the tournament now, where all of these players that are still in are going to be fighting for both those all-important championship points and those positions in the top cut. With the amount of players and being 9 rounds of Swiss, there are some players with an X&2 record that unfortunately will not be progressing to the top 32. We'll see how that shakes out after a couple of rounds, but really tense time in the tournament for quite a few of our players now.
It really is, and there's a lot of factors going into tournament play, especially when you're having to go through so many Swiss rounds, as well as the time that it takes for all of the sort of setups of the tournament to take place. You know, we've already been here. I think we've been streaming nearly 9 hours right now, and we're not even down to round 9, which you'd think surely 1 round, 1 hour, but no, that's not the case. And I think there's a lot going into this. There's a lot of mental and physical fatigue that the trainers have to combat against.
Right.
So being able to sort of like keep your senses and keep, you know, hydrated, make sure that you've got that energy level up to a very good, you know, sort of place is the key sort of strategy. And we're going through a lot, and I still can't believe that there are the players that have just not lost a set.
No, exactly. I mean, we've got like a few players left that do have an X&O record and are undefeated so far. They've been doing the right thing to get their brain energy carrying on through this length of tournament. And we've got to remember here that usually our regionals in the past have been sort of 200 to 400 players on average. That's really 8 rounds of Swiss usually being the case. Now we've got 9 rounds. That's the same as day 1 of an international championships. And we're at a regional, Costa.
Are we? Wait, what? I came to the wrong event. Apologies. No, I mean, that's definitely the case. And I think it's so vital in order to go ahead and, you know, sort of process the mindset of how we have these tournaments. The attendance has been rising phenomenally on average per tournament. We already know that there are quite a few other events, both European as well as American, that already have astronomical attendance, which is great to see how the game is honestly growing in popularity. People are loving it. They want to get more involved. So it is honestly such a heartwarming thing to see coming back to the season of VGC.
Exactly. We've got players that have, you know, joined during the online era. We've had players come into the game because of Scarlet and Violet and the success of the game in general. But of course, we've got older players that have been playing for so many years, some of which we've been able to feature today, that have been able to, you know, come back to the game and, you know, reconnect with all of this sort of new mechanics and terrestrialization that changes the game so much, and it's so refreshing to be able to play. Yeah,
it honestly really is. But talking about play, we do have our round 7 trainers coming up. As we can see on the screen right now, we actually have Giovanni Piscitelli on the right-hand side versus Faaiz Ashfaq, apologies, and we already know these players are honestly one of the best of their respective regions. We've got Giovanni from Italy and Faaiz from Germany, so this is going to be one for the memories.
It certainly is, and Faaiz is a player that I've been following for quite a long time in the German region and has been quite a staple of that community as well. Really good play, really solid team building. Typically what you expect actually really from a lot of the German community players like Markus Stadter and Biller, of course, one of the players that we get to feature fairly regularly. Faaiz is certainly solidly in that camp.
Yeah, exactly that. So, of course, we do have his opponent, Giovanni, which is no sort of, you know, easy opponent, to say the least. He's got multiple top cuts. We've had the pleasure as well of being able to feature him on stream multiple times. He is such a great character, great player, and I think being able to sort of see how he goes through his mind process of team building has been quite great, really. I think he does try to go for a bit of the niche change peaks where he can, of course, but he does actually like bringing sort of standard sets, but having a bit of change, adding his own little salt of difference, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. And seeing two players at this sort of stage in the tournament, we're not just talking about two players that, have good pedigree in previous tournaments and all of that. We're also seeing players at this stage of the tournament that actually are performing really well, and they're on their game and they're having their day. So, the question is always in these sort of tournaments, what happens, and this is especially true further in the tournament, what happens when these two forces that are coming up against each other clash, they meet? One of them has got to be a winner.
Yeah, exactly that. So looking a bit at the actual teams themselves, Giovanni is actually going to be bringing the Amoonguss, Mimikyu, Volcarona, Baxcalibur, Taurus Paldean form, of which is that Aqua breed, as well as that King Gambit. I think we've seen quite a bit of King Gambit then.
Yeah, King Gambit's one of those Pokemon. I don't think any of us expected Bisharp to get an evolution, but here we are. And it's proving it really effective in this format. Faaiz, of course, is going to be running a Paldean Taurus as well, but going to be the Blaze breed rather than the Aqua breed. So a little bit of a difference there. We have that Tatsugiri Dondozo combination. It's going to be that curly form, the attack boosting variant. Meowscarada, Glimora, and Golden Go.
Yes, so I think going into this, we have seen Dondozo already make a bit of an appearance. Definitely the previous round we saw why it could be really good, but also we saw the ways that you can counteract it. I think we've seen along a multitude of different strategies, such as Clear Smog. We've also seen Haze at times. I think the Murkrow, we only saw that one time out of today, which you would have surely thought that Murkrow would have been great to see. But of course, over on Giovanni's side, that Mirror Herb on the Taurus does match up quite nicely against Dondozo Tatsugiri.
It does, and as you can see on the screen, Faaiz on the left, Giovanni on the right. 2019 European Internationals top 32 from Faaiz, and a German national top 16 cut in 2014. So a player that has been playing for a long time. Giovanni, a little bit newer to the accomplishments in the 2020 and 2022 season. Getting the DC Open top 8 was a particular highlight, I would imagine, and Bremen Regionals runner-up as well in the 2022 season.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just being able to see that amount of achievements as well just knows that we're in a certain caliber and end stage of the tournament where we're just going to be consistently seeing the top players at the toppest of forms as well.
Yeah, exactly. Both of these players 6-0. And Faaiz on the screen there, you can see that Glimora looking a little bit different to the Glimoras that we've seen in other tournaments. Actually opting for a little bit of a different set there with the Focus Sash and Toxic coming out, probably as a counter to Dondozo teams, using a method of damage that doesn't care how many stat boosts that you have available to you. I really like that Tatsugiri set as well, using it a little bit more consistently, not going for those choice scarf locking sets where you can only do sort of one thing in an end game. The ability to have Taunt and access to switching between Muddy Water and Draco Meteor is really instrumental, I think.
Yeah, it really is. And I think Meowscarada, we've seen, does actually run that Life Orb quite consistently. It's either going to be Focus Sash or Life Orb. And I think the fact that you've got the Life Orb pairing with the Overgrow, you're going to be able to take a bit of recoil damage after every attack that you deal. But then, of course, you are going to be approaching that Overgrow range where you're all of a sudden going to get a very substantial boost to those Flower Tricks that, of course, do always cause critical damage.
Right, and of course, Protean has changed in its mechanics in this particular format now in the Scarlet and Violet games, where, you don't really want to be changing to Grass type and then losing the same type attack bonus on your Dark type moves when you move yet again. But now Giovanni's team, as you can see in front of you there, that King Gambit that I think a lot of players have opted for a similar set just because of its consistency there. But there we see the Mirror Herb on the Aqua Breed Taurus as well.
Yeah, and I think it may prove to be quite crucial, even though, of course, we know that Taurus may not be able to 1v1 the Dondozo Tatsugiri sort of core. It is quite nice to be able to take advantage of those boosts, but however, we've got that Volcarona, which does have the Quiver Dance, Ben, and I am so excited to actually see this pay off. You'd think, given that there is a Giga Drain, maybe there'd be a Grass-type Terra. However, it seems to be that Water type.
Yeah, I really like the defensive play on that one. As a Volcarona veteran from way back in the day, it was always one of the most difficult things about running that Pokemon. Yeah, I had to have so much support because of that 4 times weakness to rock. So, hey, Terra comes around, you can change it into a Water type and stop it taking so many super effective hits, and it's really nice to see.
It really, really is, and I think that's what a point that we were talking about earlier on, where initially in the meta we saw a lot of same sort of type Terra options, but now we're starting to see the more defensive play as opposed to offensive. But of course, we are actually going to be getting into this game 1 right now, where we do have a Taurus and a Glamora lead versus another Taurus, as well as a Volcarona by its side.
We do indeed, and we can see the game from Giovanni's perspective here. And I think, you know, both of these Taurus coming out and being paired next to special attackers on the other side of the field is maybe a little bit telling there as to these players sort of sizing each other up and not wanting to, you know, take too much of a backseat in the early game. But of course, of those special attackers, the Glamora probably feels a little bit more safe than that Volcarona.
Yeah, most definitely does, as we are going to be seeing the Volcarona switch out now for the Moongus. A sort of defensive switch in, of course, makes a lot of sense. Not only do you resist any sort of type of damage that may go into that slot, as I'm not expecting a fire type there, going to be from the Taurus, but you do have the option of going for Spore for the following turn, as we actually see the Will-O-Wisp trying to target down Giovanni's Taurus there. And it's quite nice because we did see the interaction that phases Taurus seemed to be fast, as its Intimidate did actually set itself off first.
Right, and I think, like, you know, seeing that and then seeing the differences between how these Aqua Bred and Blaze Breed Tauruses interact, where, okay, yeah, the water one's going to be threatening the fire one with the water type attacks, but the fire one tends to be trying to be a little bit speedier and has that access to Will-O-Wisp to neuter the damage as well.
Yeah, and we did actually see the Glamora, which is now leaving the field. It did try targeting down the slot of which Volcarona was in. However, it was met with that Amoonguss with Toxic, as it does have that poison typing. It's not affected, but we're going to be seeing phases. Tauros go for the Protect right now. It will be safeguarding itself from the opposing Taurus over on Giovanni's side. And we're going to be seeing the Amoonguss Spore going into what is now Goldango, showing its ability off Good as Gold.
I think that's the first time I've actually seen Good as Gold activate in this tournament so far. We got to round 7 and we managed to see it, so, you know, that's really good. But yeah, nice switching up there from both players, nice protecting. We've still not seen any damage yet coming out onto the field. We're in turn 3. So I'm expecting to see like a little bit of a switch up and a little bit more offensive pressure now that the Golden goes on the field.
Yeah, and I think Volcarona is going to be coming back right now. It wants to be able to potentially take any sort of make it rain damage. Of course, it is going to be resisting it due to its fire typing against the steel, and maybe even a cheeky Will-O-Wisp that could be going into that slot. However, we are going to be seeing the Amoonguss go for the water type Terror here. Maybe trying to, of course, resist that fire-type mover, which is the Flare Blitz, quite nicely, should I say, as well as that Make It Rain. So what an optimal sort of type of Terror to actually go for. But we're not going to be seeing Make It Rain come out. We're going to be seeing Nasty Plot instead.
And a Spore finishing off the turn from that Amoonguss, going into that Taurus on Faiz's side of the field. And yeah, really good turn there for Giovanni. I mean, okay, so the Golden got the Make It Rain going up onto the field and is going to be able to do quite a bit of damage. But Volcarona and Amoonguss are resisting those hits at the moment. And with Quiver Dance access on that Volcarona, especially since Taurus has to take a guaranteed turn of sleep, there is quite a lot of opportunity to Giovanni to just, you know, get their own boost going and make sure that they can do a lot of damage to Faiz's side of the field next turn.
As we are going to be seeing the Amoonguss go for the Rage Powder right now. Just want to make sure that it redirects any sort of focus down attacks coming up from the +2 Goldango. As talking about pluses, we're going to be seeing that Volcarona go for the Quiver Dance. It now has +1 in its special attack, special defense, as well as speed. But guess who else does that as well?
Yeah, that Taurus taking those boosts as well. The speed is definitely going to be relevant, as is the special attack there. Shadow Ball coming out from the Goldango. Not enough to pick up the KO, though, on that Amoonguss. Really well trained there from Giovanni, but really like the way that, you know, switching up to that Shadow Ball, no access to something like Power Gem or Thunderbolt that we've seen on other Goldango sets, because it is that nasty plot set, and you have to devote a move set to it. So yeah, let's see how this develops, because now that the Mirror Herb is gone from the Taurus on Faiz's side of the field, Giovanni's got to think about, do you Quiver Dance again to get it, just to make sure that you're going to be going faster than that Taurus, because naturally speaking, Volcarona and Taurus can be trained to be exactly the same speed.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think the Volcarona, though, won't exactly be able to do as much as it would like against that Taurus, but Faaiz is actually going to be switching it out for the Dondozo, which is going to be making its appearance. Rage Powder from that Amoonguss is going to be redirecting a single target damage attack coming up from Goldango, which actually survives on the slitherest of health there. Critical hit onto the Dondozo does add a bit of chip damage to it, and we do actually see the Adwa Berry activating there. We'll be recovering a bit of HP on that Amoonguss. Sorry, apologies, on the Goldango. As we're going to be seeing a critical hit on the Volcarona, and that is quite big, if I'm honest. You know, you completely nullify all of the special defensive stat stages that it was able to accumulate.
Right, I mean, like, if you're Faaiz, you love to see it, don't you? Like, that's, if you were ever wondering how you were going to be able to do enough damage to the Volcarona, that's certainly one way to get started. Citrus Berry is activating, though, so is going to be taking Volcarona to, you know, a half-decent health range, so to speak. Certainly enough to make it rain, not be able to knock out the Volcarona. Potentially now, after the special attack drop that the Goldango had on its side of the field, may not be able to knock it out with a Shadow Ball either.
Yeah, and that's something to note as well, Ben. The fact that we've got a Dondozo, but we don't have a Tatsugiri over on Faiz's side.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I think that's quite a good call here for Faaiz. I mean, looking at the team sheet, it does have access to Wave Crash and the Body Press as well. And the Wave Crash is going to be significant on doing damage to that Volcarona.
As we are going to be seeing the Kingambit now come onto the field. And the Volcarona just going to be going for a Protect right there. It wants to be able to better its sort of board state, keep it on the field for the Dondozo to be able to take it out the following turn. So good read there on the Protects. And actually Faaiz going for the double Protect. So one Protect on the Goldango as well as that Dondozo, which is going to be recovering a tiny bit of HP with its leftovers.
Now that's interesting here because, okay, so we know that the Giga Drain is one of the moves of choice on the Volcarona. That certainly would be a target into the Dondozo. But if you're Faaiz, you've got to be thinking, like, how am I going to be making progress back into the game? And you've got to make a call there, I think, as to whether or not you protect the Goldango or you protect the Dondozo and, you know, bait out exactly what that Volcarona wants to do.
Oh, but we're going to be seeing the Sucker Punch KO that Goldango at the moment. That is quite big to be able to finally get rid of a bit of damage. But because of the unaware of the Dondozo, it's not going to be taking quite as much damage as it would have liked. But it did still take a substantial amount as the Volcarona was able to recover a tiny bit of HP, but actually get a bit drowsy later on due to that yawn.
Yeah, and that's going to be really big, actually. It forces Giovanni to say, do I want to let this Volcarona go to sleep? Or do I want to switch it out, lose the boosts, and then bring it back in later and potentially use them in place? Of course, Glimora and Dondozo on the field. Dondozo that we've seen carries Protect, but that Glimora does carry Spiky Shield as well. So, you know, there is an opportunity for Faaiz to go for another double Protect use that yawn, see if Giovanni does go for a little switch, change up the board position, most importantly, remove that Volcarona for the field, and then sort of take the game from there.
Yeah, and I think you don't commonly see Dondozos actually carry body press, so it is quite a fascinating set that Faaiz is actually running here. So we are going to be seeing the Tauros now come onto the field from Giovanni's side. We'll be getting that Intimidate drop onto the Dondozo, and ooh, looks like we're going to be getting a Terastallization from Faiz's side, the Dondozo in particular for the Steel type.
Yeah, and that's going to be pretty influential, actually. Quite a call to make in front of a Volcarona that could just, go for a heat wave there. Spiky Shield, though, coming out from the Glimora, not doing too much this turn.
Not doing too much at all, but I'll tell you what is doing a lot. That Kowtow Cleave nearly picking up the KO thanks to the critical hit onto the Dondozo. And in response, we actually do see the body press not quite enough to pick up the KO onto that King Gambit, which does mean that King Gambit's in a situation where it can still get those priority moves going, such as Sucker Punch, to be able to sort of take out the Dondozo if it tries to go on the offense.
No offense coming out from this Tauros, is going to be going for the Protect this turn. Really impressed that the King Gambit is actually on the field while we're seeing this Glimora go for a Toxic into that Protect. Ironhead, though, coming out, knocking the Glimora down to its Focus Sash, so only 1 HP left, and going to be activating that Toxic Debris ability, putting a layer of Toxic Spikes on the field. Not something that you see too often in VGC.
No, most definitely not. And we see that little interaction there of the Dondozo being very well aware of the Sucker Punch from King Gambit's side, does opt to go for Yawn. So we had a couple of layers of predictions coming out from both of the trainers there, where we saw King Gambit just wanted to make sure that it's going to be able to get that Glimora down to the Focus Sash, but inadvertently we're going to be seeing the Toxic Spikes now being set. So the moment the Volcarona comes back onto the field, it will be subject to getting poisoned.
I don't know if that's a benefit or a curse, really, because that Dondozo has access to Yawn, and that was the thing that sent out the Volcarona in the first place. When you've got Giga Drain access, maybe there's not a lot of health that you can regain with all of the Pokemon on Faiz's side of the field, being resistant to Giga Drain. But it does, you do have a little bit of HP recovery going on there.
Yeah, you most definitely do, and we are going to be seeing the Volcarona now coming onto the field. It will, of course, be incurring that poison status at the moment. Wave Crash, however, does come out from the Tauros. Over on Giovanni's side, does pick up that KO onto the Dondozo. So Faiz's side right now, he does still have 2 Pokemon remaining. It is going to be the Glimora, which is on 1 HP, as well as that Tauros.
Yeah, and both of these Pokemon can protect. There is the Will-O-Wisp option on Faiz's side of the field, but that Tauros on for Faiz's has only taken 1 turn of sleep. It could be waking up this turn. It could have a turn or 2 left to go. So I like the defensive play here of Faiz going for that Spiky Shield.
It makes sense. You just want to be able to get any sort of pressure onto the Glimora out of the way. And talking about pressure, we see the Wave Crash coming out from the Tauros over on Giovanni's side, does connect with Faiz's. And Faiz's Tauros does actually wake up, goes for the close combat into the Tauros over on Giovanni's side, doesn't quite pick up a KO, does of course drop both its physical as well as its special defense by 1 stage, and the Giga Drain focus from the Volcarona tried to pick off that Glimora, but of course was unsuccessful.
But now that the Spiky Shield has been used on Glimora, there's Aqua Jet on that Tauros on Giovanni's side of the field, probably going to be able to take out either Pokemon of their choosing at this stage, or even just switch out the Tauros, reset the Intimidate, and come in and just absolutely make sure that you're picking up the KO there.
Yeah, and Tauros just opting to go for Protect right now, I think, given the situation, is very understanding of that Aqua Jet, which Faizz was able to recognize quite well there from Giovanni's side. Giga Drain, however, Volcarona does outspeed, does pick up the KO, and all of a sudden, it is a 3 versus 1 scenario.
It's quite telling on how the Volcarona has been trained here, because the Glimora can naturally be slower than the Volcarona. Of course, all of these Tauros technically, and the Volcarona could technically be
speed
like
type.
The same speed.
Yeah.
But it looks like this Volcarona was trained to be pretty speedy. Faizz knows that is going to be forfeiting, and game 1 goes to Giovanni.
Yeah, game 1 to Giovanni right there. We saw quite a few reads going on from both trainers there. I think, of course, they're well-veteran players. We know that there's a lot of things going on, especially the fact that they have access to each other's teams, open team sheet format. I think there's a lot of mind games, more than ever, really, in all sort of VGC that we've seen from past generations. Given Terra is most definitely a thing to look out for.
Yeah, and I think, like, looking at that game and how it went, I wasn't sure about the Dondozo coming without the Tatsugiri, but I also wasn't sure of, if you're going to bring one of the combination, whether it should have been that Dondozo or the Tatsugiri coming, because, the Tatsugiri has a little bit better typing to deal with what's on Giovanni's side of the field. It does have extra resistance to water. It isn't weak to that Giga Drain that did so much damage to the Dondozo on the switch-in.
It did.
And of course, we have access to things like Taunt. So Giovanni's Amoonguss could be maybe a little bit more threatened, not be able to set up equally. The same with Volcarona.
Yeah, 100%. And I think going into this game 2 right now, I think Faaiz, recognizing how, of course, that game 1 went for themselves, is going to have to try to re-strategize. What do we think will work out for him at the moment? I think the Glimora, it feels nice, but it didn't feel quite nice in game 1.
Yeah, and I think, the game is slightly different if that Will-O-Wisp goes off on turn 1 from both Taurus facing each other down. So, maybe positioning to make sure that you're getting that, maybe threaten the Dondozo Tatsugiri right off the bat.
Yeah, as we are going to be seeing that Dondozo and Glimora coming out from, of course, Faiz's side. So, Amoonguss and Tauros, on the other hand, we've got a situation where, of course, the Spore is a real thing that needs to be very well respected in this situation. So, just kind of comprehending what needs to be done from a defensive point of view, I think is absolute key.
It certainly is. And the question I have really now is, how do you manage the Tatsugiri coming in or not? When you see Dondozo at the front, even if it wasn't in, the combination wasn't in the last game, since it didn't go well for Faaiz, you kind of think, hey, it's probably going to be coming this time.
Yeah, and I think being able to have body press is really nice on Dondozo, because you don't necessarily have to go down the physical attack side of things. Just use your defensive stat of +2 with that commander ability to just go ahead and wreak havoc. As we're going to be seeing attempts from both Dondozo and Amoonguss putting each other to sleep. I think the Dondozo's Yawn is going to take a turn a bit too late, but the Spore was able to put immediate sleep status onto the Dondozo.
Yeah, and I think that's, with the King Gambit coming onto the field now, really important and impactful, because there isn't that body press access or threat on the field, at least for a couple of turns here from that King Gambit. So it can, target into the Glimora, it can do a little bit of work itself.
Yeah, and I think the Toxic into the switching of the King Gambit was quite nice. I think Giovanni handled that very, very well. He's been very accurate so far with expecting this sort of Toxic going into the slot. He's either been using the Amoonguss or he's been using the Steel type of King Gambit quite nicely. As we're going to be seeing Faaiz actually switching out the Dondozo for now, bringing in that Tauros, which is going to be actually setting off this King Gambit's Defiance, bringing it up to +1 and making it a bit more dangerous, but at the same time, this may be the strategy, of course. Now you've all of a sudden given your own Tauros +2 in its attack.
Yeah, and that's going to be really, really powerful, that Tauros. But it does kind of lock it to the field, as Tauros does switch in there for the Amoonguss to predict, I suppose, any type of fire moves coming out. But that, wow, that was a lot of damage from that Glimora.
That really, really was. And we saw, of course, the Toxic Debris coming out as an effect. But I think this is what, Ben, I was wanting to see from the Glimora. Yes, of course, Toxic is amazing. As a poison type, it is 100% accurate, as long as it can hit into a Pokemon that isn't either poison type or steel type. But it's just got really good special attack that needs to be utilized.
And utilize it shall. In the meantime, though, the question I have is, how is Giovanni going to get around this Tauros on Faiz's side of the field with its boost and with the partner Pokemon Glimora? Because that's going to be a lot of damage from any sort of close combat. And of course, even as we're seeing, if King Gambit goes for its flying type Terra, it's still going to be taking a lot of damage from any fire attacks coming out from the Taurus.
But no fire attacks, at least for this turn, as the Taurus does opt to go for the Protect. But, of course, following suit, Giovanni's Taurus does the exact same. However, we are going to be seeing the Glamora follow suit yet again, going for its own spiky shield. So, unfortunately, King Gambit left on its lonesome self, trying to deal damage into Faiz's Taurus, but, of course, being unsuccessful.
Right, and like, okay, this turn looks like not a lot happened, but actually the board state changed quite a bit with that King Gambit going for its Terror and changing into the flying type. I really like how Faaiz has maneuvered himself to give himself a little bit of time, not overextending, not committing the Terror too early, and of course allowing Giovanni to commit their own Terror first, let's say.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. As we are going to be seeing the Amoonguss switch in right now, a defensive switch. It makes a lot of sense because the poison spikes do now disappear. That is a great utility of having a poison type on your team. And Dondozo does come back onto the field right here. And I think it makes a lot of sense in the build-up of it. However, the most crucial thing right there is even though Faaiz has got a couple of boosts going in its attack, it opts to go for that Will-O-Wisp, does connect onto the King Gambit, and as a result, pitiful amounts of damage dealt onto Dondozo.
Really not doing that much, and actually probably quite telling as to how this Dondozo has been trained, especially with that body press. You want to be investing as much as you sensibly can in its defensive stats, so you do as much damage as possible. But now that the Will-O-Wisp has gone off onto the King Gambit, this Taurus is free, especially with the Amoonguss on the field, to start going for big damaging attacks.
It really is, and I think in this situation you need to try to put on as much offensive pressure as you can. If you're from Faiz's side, maybe take advantage of the Amoonguss that is still on the field right now. It's a relatively easy target, so Giovanni can easily switch out for it. However, we're actually going to be seeing the King Gambit switch out for his own Taurus, which is going to get that Intimidate drop, I believe, down to neutral, if I'm not mistaken now.
Yeah, I think it's had 2 Intimidates going off onto it. We're going to be seeing the Terror, though, coming out from Faiz's side of the field. It is going to be the Grass type on that Taurus, and I really like that, especially with the Amoonguss on the field and having the Aqua Breed Taurus coming in. Close combat's easily going to be enough to pick up the knockout here.
It really will, and what a choice of going into that flying type at King Gambit there. I think Faaiz making a very safe but also good sort of middle ground play there, making sure that you deal at least a bit of damage and completely ignore that Amoonguss, which I think Grass Terror type kind of does that very well.
It does, and yeah, now I'm starting to think like, okay, so we've seen the Glamora, we've seen the Taurus, we've seen the Dondozo. Is that Tatsugiri in the back? Question mark?
Question mark,
because
indeed.
Now the Terror has gone off onto the Taurus. It kind of makes me feel like there isn't actually that Tatsugiri in the back. It's one of the other Pokemon there for Faaiz, just holding it there, waiting for maybe a point where a Golden Go could come onto the field and start sweeping.
And I think that makes a lot of sense because you might not want to waste a slot down to the combination of Dondozo and Tatsugiri and have an additional Pokemon in the back, as we are going to be seeing that Flare Blitz deal a substantial amount of damage onto the Amoonguss, but more importantly, the Volcarona was left on its own just to go ahead and get a Quiver Dance up.
Right, and as we said before, the Quiver Dance isn't going to be, or sorry, the Dondozo isn't going to be worried about the Quiver Dance, but that Taurus is going to be worried about the Heat Wave coming out onto the field. Amoonguss, of course, has been yawned now, so feeling a little bit drowsy. Nice to see Amoonguss going to sleep for a change, I think. But, you know, again, options for Giovanni to be looking at as to whether or not you keep that Amoonguss, which isn't doing too much on the field.
No, it really wasn't, but the Rage Powder was quite nice in case the Dondozo woke up, of which it did in case that yawn was going into the Volcarona slot. But talking about Amoonguss, it's going to be switching out for that flying type, the King Gambit coming back onto the field, whilst Taurus just going for a very passive protect play right now. Of course, it does not want to be subject to that overwhelming damage of the Heat Wave from the Volcarona, as Dondozo actually avoids that attack and wants to start slowing the momentum down on Giovanni's side. Wants to get things a bit drowsy for Volcarona, maybe a bit unsure of what it's doing at this current point, because in this situation, it's forcing Volcarona out of its comfortable spot of having that quiver dance set up.
Right, and again, more choices to be made, but that Dondozo, really like the way that Faaiz is playing it, just slowing the game down and really not committing to those big attacks, especially Wave Crash, which has recoil. You want to make sure that you're keeping that Dondozo as healthy as possible.
Yeah, most definitely, as we are going to be seeing the Glamora switch back in. Very, very small HP remaining for it. Maybe wanting to actually take a hit there on purpose. However, we are going to be seeing the Amoonguss, on the other hand, just make a quick swift switch in, whilst the Heat Wave is just going to connect on the Glamora. That kind of falls in a bit to Faiz's strategy there, just wanting to make sure that at least the Glamora could take the hit, whilst Faaiz is going to be able to preserve another Pokemon in the back.
And we see the Yawn failing there. Likely the Volcarona was the target, and looks like that slot is caught in what we used to call the Yawn Vortex.
Yes.
Here, where you're constantly yawning into that slot, something we saw in the Dynamax era quite a bit. Where, if you switch it out, the next thing gets yawned, and then you have to make that choice all over again. So really nice play there from Faaiz, and that Volcarona does indeed start taking a nap. That's going to mean this Taurus coming in is completely safe to start going for some attacks, not fearing any heat waves or anything else coming out. And of course, likely being faster than the Dondozo, very much so, is potentially going to be able to knock out that redirecting Amoonguss before the Wave Crash goes into Volcarona.
Exactly, as we are going to be seeing as a response to that. Giovanni bring in the King Gambit right now. Maybe wanting to get a bit more of that regenerator recovery ability over onto that Amoonguss, as we are going to be seeing Volcarona take its mandatory turn and the Flare Blitz go into the King Gambit and dealing a bit of damage, to say the least. However, Wave Crash is going to be coming out and actually still doubling down on that slot. Not actually opting to go to target Volcarona, which may have been quite vital there, and sort of punish from Giovanni for any sort of passive double targeting into that slot.
I like that play, though. I mean, the Amoonguss goes to switch out to protect itself from the Flare Blitz. You still get lots of damage into the King Gambit, and it's one of those Pokemon that's so bulky that any sort of damage on it is really nice to start adding up.
Yeah, and Volcarona is actually going to wake up right now and deal a very good amount of super effective damage with that Giga Drain. Flare Blitz going into the slot. I think if this is a double up, Ben, it is looking like the Volcarona will be leaving us this game. However, we do see the bit of recovery from the Citrus Berry, of course. Kowtow Cleave, however, does come out, deals very minimal damage, and the Wave Crash will be going ahead and wiping that Volcarona out of Game 2.
But that Flame Body is coming back with a vengeance. Volcarona says, hang on a second, I may be getting knocked out, but you're going to take a little bit of a burn for that.
A little bit of a parting gift, per se.
Exactly that. So, yeah, this Dondozo is going to be doing less damage. But to be fair, like, with the King Gambit having that burn status as well, isn't going to be doing too much damage. We've knocked out Faaiz has knocked out 2 of Giovanni's Pokemon, so it is the last 2 Pokemon on Giovanni's side of the field. And so, like, this Taurus on Faiz's side of the field is looking really strong right now.
It really is, and I think the way that both of the trainers have been handling the back and forths between all of these interactions of Pokemon, you've got the double Tauruses, you've got the capability of the Will-O-Wisp as well, that's been coming out and has been quite prevalent because it has been having this King Gambit sort of damage potent availability, has been quite substantial, and we are going to be seeing that King Gambit, of course, getting KO'd right here, as naturally Taurus is going to outspeed it, knock it out, and it having the Grass type is so good against this Amoonguss with how it's positioned.
It is, and now that there is no ability for the Dondozo to go to sleep because of that burn, counteracted by the leftovers that it's holding there, isn't going to be going down anytime soon. Yawn coming out into the Amoonguss is going to make it take a nap next turn, that Pollen Puff coming out at the end, going into the side where the King Gambit was previously means that Taurus is going to be hanging on.
Yeah, it was a very sad moment for Amoonguss, to say the least. We are going to be seeing the body press come out from the Dondozo deal. Now, I'm sorry, that is a very sad amount of damage. But of course, Amoonguss goes for the Pollen Puff, does try to focus down on the Tauros here, and I think just what Faaiz is wanting to do is just try to make sure he essentially locks in this end game. You know, trying to make sure that the Amoonguss does go to sleep is always the smartest play. Going for the protect, then you have the availability, going for the damage with that Flare Blade from Tauros into the Amoonguss.
Yeah, just completely safe play there.
Yeah.
A really different game to game 1. Game 2, we only saw 3 of Faiz's Pokemon managing to position them and maneuver them in such a way that they could neutralize everything that Giovanni had on their side of the field. And a really interesting way to change from game 1, because we didn't see anything new coming out from either player. So really coming down to how these trainers are predicting and playing against each other. And actually, I think that lead of Dondozo and Glamora was much more effective than bringing out the Taurus in combination with that Glamora in game 1.
Yeah, and I think the fact that we saw more of an offensive sort of strategy coming out from this Glamora, and then obviously you have the passive Spiky Shield every now and then, because you want to make sure that your status ailments that you've impacted and imparted over onto your opponent do stack up and take residual damage, or maybe you get those yawns and you want to do that very safe double protect to ensure that the subsequent turn that Pokemon does fall to sleep is quite nice. I really actually enjoy that sort of play style, and it's quite control-based. You want to try to make sure that you're limiting the options that your opponent can actually choose in order to sort of better the state of the board for yourself.
Right, and you know, speaking of board state, I think one of the things that made the most impact in that game was that King Gambit going for that Flying Terror and getting burnt for its troubles as well at the same time. Both losing that Steel typing, I think, was probably a good thing overall, especially in front of that Taurus, but getting burnt was really problematic because effectively Giovanni lost all of their damage potential.
Yeah, and I think it's quite tough because we think about the interactions that the moment that you go ahead and you utilize your Terra type, that's it. You can't take it back. You need to try to choose the most optimal moment to be able to use it, or else that element of surprise will potentially become a weakness to you.
It will, and I spy a Tatsugiri on the field, Costa, coming out from Faiz's side of the field. Are we going to see that Dondozo ability with the Commander? I'm really hoping so. Amoonguss and Taurus, though, the safe, consistent lead there for Giovanni.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You cover a lot of stuff in regards to the flowchart versus Faiz's team at the moment with the archetype. I don't think Giovanni may have expected Tatsugiri, so we most definitely did not. So being able to actually see what it might do here will be quite fascinating. So we're going to be seeing it's going to actually take a lot of damage from the close combat on the Taurus, as it will actually go ahead and get some recovery done with that Citrus Berry, which is quite nice for it. We know, for example, that it does have access to Muddy Water, Draco Meteor, Taunt, and Protect, and we actually see the KO there, of course, from the Sludge Bomb. That wasn't even a double up, ladies and gents. That's just how much damage it does after a close combat debuff there, and we're going to be seeing Pollen Puff not go into the Taurus from Giovanni's side, actually targeting the Tatsugiri.
Now that's interesting, because normally the reason that you target with Pollen Puff on your opponent from an Amoonguss is because you think, hey, I'm not going to do quite enough damage, but the Amoonguss is probably going to finish it off, and that Tatsugiri's got quite a bit of health left. So maybe a little bit of underestimation there from Giovanni on how defensively Faaiz has trained that Tatsugiri. One of the great things about the combination is it doesn't matter how much health that Tatsugiri has got. As long as it's got one, it can activate that Commander ability with the Dondozo. So the strategy is still very much in Faiz's capability to achieve in this match, and especially looking at what's on the field now, an early loss of the Taurus on Giovanni's side and being in front of that Glamora is a hard place to be.
It really is, as the Mimikyu actually comes out for the first time from Giovanni's side. A bit of a change-up in strategy here, and recognizing sort of its potential of not only having Disguise as well as that Life Orb, which adds that additional buff to its damage output. As, of course, we are going to be seeing that water-type terrestrialization. Coming out from the Volcarona, going for the Quiver Dance, of course, this means it no longer has a weakness to not only water-type moves, as well as rock-type moves.
Yeah, and that's going to be massive coming in from that turn, of course.
Oh!
Oh my god, critical hit coming out. And the poison!
No!
Oh my god. Yeah, again, if you're Faaiz, you love to see it.
You really do. I mean, all of it. This is what I was talking about, Ben. The fact that once this Glimmora goes on the offensive, it just wreaks havoc. We saw it pick up the KO onto a Tauros with a lot, if not all of its HP after a close combat drop of defenses. And just seeing it put in the work right now, obviously critical hit, and the poison, very well trained Pokemon, by the way, just really has put a lot of pressure into Giovanni's strategy going into this Game 3.
Right, but that Volcarona has got access to Giga Drain, can get some health back, so, and it has got some boosts. It's not going to be weak to a lot of the moves that Tatsugiri and Glimmora have on offer now. And so, like, okay, crit's unfortunate, poison's unfortunate, but if you're Giovanni, you've got to be looking for ways to really get on the offensive and claw back this game.
Yeah, exactly. As we're going to be seeing the Volcarona try to go for the Giga Drain into that Glimmora slot, but of course will be met with the Protect. However, Mimikyu actually trying to double up into that slot is quite interesting here, as it wants to essentially kind of ignore the Tatsugiri for now, doesn't think it's that big of a threat. However, Muddy Water, on the other hand, will connect, will break that disguise ability of the Mimikyu, and in this situation does allow a bit more offensive breathing room for this Glimmora.
Now, I wonder if that was a little bit of a read from Faaiz, or if there isn't a Dondozo in the background. Like, you've got to question which or what sort of things that these players are telegraphing here to their opponent, as Tatsugiri does leave the field. Is it going to be Dondozo?
Oh!
That it is.
That's the wrong slot, Faaiz. It should be the Glimmora. However, of course, jokes aside, we are going to be seeing the Volcarona go for the Giga Drain into the Glimmora right there. Will be dealing a bit of damage, of course, in return, gaining a bit of HP. And there is the boldness of the Glimmora and how it's been trained. The fact that it is now allowed to go on the offensive may prove to be quite pivotal because of the double up of that residual damage being dealt over time on the Volcarona due to the poison typing, and the fact that it just survived on 4 HP and Mimikyu is no longer taunted.
No, it's not. But that Dondozo on the field feels like it means only one thing. The question is whether it's going to go for its Terror or not. As to what move you use. Do you use Heat Wave or do you use that Giga Drain?
Exactly, and Glimmora just wanting to extend its longevity, as well as the Dondozo. Very safe double protect coming out there from Faaiz, as the Volcarona will be going down at the end of this turn. Shadow Sneak, even though it's got priority, it cannot break through the double protect.
No, and going in there, taking a little bit of damage from that spiky shield as well. Just taking down a little bit more of its health. Oh, no, wait.
Of course.
It was a side Giga Drain.
Oh my lord, that is genius. Absolute genius from Giovanni. And it makes a lot of sense. You want to be able to, once again, extend Volcarona's presence and activeness on the actual field in order to at least outspeed this Glimmora and finally get rid of it.
Yeah, that's such a cool play.
It really is.
You know, you don't, at this stage, really need Mimikyu at much health. I mean, it has got that life orb, so it's going to be knocking itself out after just one attack. But if that attack is going to be getting you into a good position, maybe that's all you need.
Exactly, as we're going to be seeing the Amoonguss now come onto the field, maybe trying to preserve that Mimikyu for the end game in having that sort of prioritization, as well as actually removing the poison spikes naturally, as we've discussed already. Poison type Pokemon do that for sure, as they are switched in, but we do have that steel type Terror coming up from Dondozo though.
Yeah, so the question is now if Giovanni did go for the Giga Drain or went for the Heat Wave.
Oh!
And it is the Heat Wave. What a prediction there, knocking out the Glimmora in one. And how much damage did it do to that Dondozo? No boost from the Tatsugiri in the back, taking absolutely loads. But a body press in return is going to be enough to pick up the knockout of the Volcarona. And just like last time, A little parting gift.
A little parting gift indeed from the fiery bud. And I think being able to go for the heat wave honestly makes a lot of sense. Obviously, there's a bit of a layer of prediction and anticipation there. However, if you're able to connect with both heat waves, at least you still guarantee picking up the KO and Glamora.
Yeah, but you know, you've got a question at this stage if you're Giovanni. Have you got enough gas in the tank to be able to knock out a Dondozo, which you know has a Tatsugiri in the back? That Mimikyu is going to be knocked out to one more tick of life orb, so only one more attack left to go. And Golden Go launching onto the field. That's not the Pokemon that Amoonguss wanted to see.
No, no, it really, really isn't. That's probably the worst Pokemon that he could be going up against right now. But talking about Golden Go, it definitely goes away for that Tatsugiri coming in for its slot. And of course, the moment that Tatsugiri lands on the field, it's saying, right, let's get to it, Dondozo, and get some business going. It hops into Dondozo's mouth, does activate the Commander ability, giving it that Omni boost of +2 for all of its stat stages. It being burnt, however, does mean that all physical moves will be halved, so it's essentially dealing the amount of damage that it normally would at neutral.
Yeah, and we see the Dondozo going for the Yawn after all of the boost there. The Shadow Claw does miss, so Mimikyu gets another turn.
Oh, it actually
staying
does.
on the field. Yeah. I really have a lot of fun. Like I really enjoy that play coming out from Faaiz. Like the Golden Go comes onto the field, is like, hello, bye-bye.
It's quite cute as well.
But the strategy works, and the Tatsugiri does jump into Dondozo's mouth, avoiding any damage on that slot. And so, like, okay, sure, it's quite amusing that it comes out and then goes back in. But equally, it does serve a purpose.
It really does, and we're actually going to be seeing the taunt come out from the Mimikyu. Of course, does get that Dondozo. There may be a sort of interaction and a hint of how that Dondozo has been trained. Normally, Omni Boost, of course, will award it a higher speed on Mimikyus if it does have a bit of speed investment, so it's quite interesting to see it unable to do so.
I think that's quite telling, given the amount of damage that Kowtow Cleave was doing earlier from the King Gambit onto the Dondozo, which is to say, really not a lot.
No.
And, you know, that training has got to come from somewhere, and it looks like it's speed that is the place of choice. Giovanni here, knowing that they can't really break through the Dondozo Tatsugiri and the Golden Go in the back, does forfeit, and this game will go to Faaiz.
Faaiz indeed, with the Glamora, and I've got to say, a Pokemon coming from Area 0, making it all the way to being the hero. It is, it's quite nice indeed to actually see that damage output coming out from it. But of course, we've got that Dondozo and Tatsugiri situation going on, where you're able to sort of checkmate your opponent, essentially, if you wait for the mid to end game scenario for it.
Right, and like this is exactly the way that Faaiz played the game, because you saw all of those yawns coming out onto Giovanni's side of the field, and just like, you know, slow, gentle, progressive play that led to a position where you're like, okay, well, you can't really switch out of that yawn anymore. You have to start going to sleep at some point, otherwise you're not going to make any progress.
No.
And that's when Faaiz striked.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think it was quite nice to be able to see that sort of caliber of play, of competitive play from both trainers there. You saw there were a lot of mind games going into each sort of turn, essentially, because I think there was predict, over predict, over predict, and then you're just trying to always get that step ahead of your opponent when it comes to you having an advantage over on the board state. And just being able to see how that Dondozo was utilized from Faaiz is really creative, if I'm completely honest. I think we don't commonly see body press and yawn being an optimal set on Dondozos, but we've really gotten a good taste of how much work it could put in.
We certainly have. But another Pokemon I want to really call out before we take a little bit of a break here is that Glimora, especially seeing that what was successful in the San Diego Regionals was that Choice Specs variant, and now we saw how effective that Focus Sash was. I mean, like 2 out of 3 games.
Yep.
We saw it go out down to its Focus Sash.
Yep.
And, you know, one, great to see that the item that was of choice for that Glimora was utilized to its full, but also how much extra work it put in because of it.
Yeah, it really did, and I think being able to just both have the option of going for, let's say, toxic, trying to get rid of any sort of stally affairs or at least some boosted Pokemon such as Dondozo or even Volcarona in this case, where we saw Glimora really wanted to try to get that toxic on. It's like, no, I really need to slow you down, please, do not sweep my team. And being able to automatically switch on the offensive, go for that Sludge Bomb, which we did see, it was quite crucial, that critical hit into a poison. It's not something we commonly see, but it's most definitely something that can change a game.
Right, and we saw how Faaiz took advantage of that. But equally, I think it probably locks out the game a little bit more than Giovanni would have liked, but definitely wasn't the most influential thing, without that critical hit or the poison there. Definitely still could have gone to Faaiz with the way that he played it. So I think really we need to find out a little bit more from Faaiz himself. So we're going to go to a short break now, but we'll be back very soon for an interview with the winner of that round, Faaiz Ashfaq. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We're here at after the 7th round of the 2023 Liverpool Pokemon Regional Championships. My name's Ben Kiriakou, joined here by Faaiz Ashfaq, the winner of the previous round and a competitor that is now 7 wins and 0 losses. Faaiz, how has your tournament been and how are you feeling going 7-0?
My tournament run has been pretty cool so far, so I've managed to win all 7 rounds so far. There have been some really good games. I've had some great sets against some great opponents, and just glad to get the opportunity to play against such good players.
And how has it been? Because we were talking just a minute ago and you mentioned that this is the first time you've actually traveled outside of Germany to be playing in this sort of level of competition. So how does that feel as well?
So that's actually crazy because, I've never really had the opportunity to travel outside of Germany because I was focusing on my school studies and never wanted to jeopardize that and focus on that one. But since I am close to finishing university, I thought that maybe I'll take this season as a chance to travel a bit and see what's in there for me.
Well, it absolutely seems to be paying off. And what a game to be watching as well for all of the people at home. It was, especially after losing the first game, bouncing back and being able to win games 2 and 3 was really good to see. So, yeah, how did you feel after game 1, and how did you sort of mentally prepare for games 2 and 3?
So actually, that was the first game 1 that I lost today.
Really?
Yeah. Also, the third game that I lost today, but the first game 1 as well. And I was a little bit taken aback because, from my point of view, he outplayed me every turn. He called all my protects right and punished all my switches. And I don't know. I thought I'd have to play a bit more offensive, pressure him a lot more, and I think Yawn also forced a lot of switches on his side from my Dondozo, so I could target freely into that slot, so just to get some damage off.
And talk a little bit more about the Yawn actually from that Dondozo, because other than having that body press set, which is something that we haven't seen too much of in the format so far, that Yawn did so much work. Was that what you were expecting it to be used for coming into the tournament, or has it been more useful than you thought?
Actually, so leading up to the tournament, as I was testing this team, I did not have Yawn.
Right.
So I was running Rest on this Dondozo because the idea behind the team is kind of you have the Glimora and Taurus to spread status, set up the toxic spikes, poison everything, burn some stuff that you can't toxic, and then you have a Dondozo in the back which just continues to click Rest, and then you win. But then I thought that it was working in online play, but I was thinking that offline the timer situations are different.
Yeah.
And my friends who I was prepping with, they were really sold on Yawn on Dondozo. So I thought a few days ago I'd give it a try, and I only played a couple of games with it, and it felt good, and then I changed it to Yawn, and so far it really paid off. It's been one of the best moves on this team.
That's really interesting, especially since, like, okay, we saw it in previous formats, and the most recent of formats being such a force with Dynamax being in play. We kind of thought, like, okay, it's probably going to go off the radar, isn't it, in this format? So it's really nice seeing that doing so well. One other thing on your team that I wanted to ask you about was that Glimmora. We saw it had the ability to go for Toxic itself, as well as Toxic Debris, of course, spreading status, as you mentioned earlier. But the Glimmora that we saw in San Diego were typically carrying that choice specs, but you opted for a Focus Sash. So what was your thoughts behind that coming into this tournament?
So obviously, as people use choice specs in San Diego, I thought maybe if I were to face a Glimmora, they might also just copy the sets from there, and then in the 1 versus 1, I win. Other than that, it just pressures the opponent a lot more because they have to use 2 moves to knock out your Glimmora. And if they use a move on Glimmora, a physical one, they'll activate Toxic Debris.
Right.
That's like, it just makes playing offensive with Glimmora so much easier because most of the times the opponent will not want to target you.
Yeah.
But if they target you, they have to target you twice.
Yes. Yeah. So you get more opportunities for that Toxic Debris. You
Yes.
get more opportunities. Of course, Glimmora's not shy of doing damage, is it?
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
You know, when you're playing offensively with it and being easily able to be offensive with it, you can do so much damage, can't you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was like the thought process behind all this. Like Glimmora Dondozo was the original idea to pressure the opponent with the Toxic and then win with Dozo in the back. And Yawn actually had really good synergy with the Toxic Debris and Toxic as well because when you Yawn a mon, you force it out, and then whatever comes in, if Toxic Debris is already set up, they'll get poisoned, which is basically what I want.
Right.
So of course there are mons that can get poisoned by Toxic Debris, like Flying Mons or let's say Amoongus, but those usually don't like to get yawned. So it kind of covers each like the other thing.
It's a weird synergy using status to get different status, isn't it? But yeah,
exactly.
Really nice way that you've described that. Before we let you go back to the tournament and go back to your round 8, do you have any shout outs that you want to make for friends and family that have helped you along the way?
Oh yeah, most definitely. I'd like to give a shout out to Marcus and Fevzi and Yuki. They're like my main prep group for this tournament. I'd also like to give a shout out to all my friends that are here and supporting me, and to my parents. I love you, and yeah, I think that's it for now.
Brilliant shout outs. Thank you very much for explaining your team in such detail. I'm sure those at home will have got a lot of value from that. We're going to go to a short break now, but we'll be back with round 8 as soon as we can. So do stay tuned. We'll be seeing you very, very soon.